Hey everyone, Longacres Finance here, and today I want to show you why for the average investor, time in the market is more important than timing the market. Statistically, the average investor underperforms the market. Research done by Delbar Inc. showed that for the 20-year period through 2015, the S&P had an average rate of return of 9.85%, while the average equity fund investor had an average rate of return of 5.19%. That's pretty terrible, and true, some investors may have beaten the S&P during that time period, but imagine how many more must have not achieved a 5.19 return to bring down the average. So what is the average investor to do? You need to realize that when it comes to investing, you are your worst enemy. Human beings make emotionally driven decisions. We have the tendency to buy when prices are high, a little FOMO action. And we tend to overreact when markets crash. Famed economist Eugene Fama once said, "Your money is like a bar of soap. The more you handle it, the less you'll have." But can it really be that simple? Make limited movements and let the market work for you? Almost. It takes patience and discipline, combined with time, to achieve excellent results. Today, I'm going to show you what that looked like using historical S&P 500 total returns. The S&P 500 index measures the performance of 500 of the largest companies listed on US stock exchanges. It also happens to be one of the most commonly followed equity indices and one of the cheapest to invest in. The total return includes two components: the return generated by price and the return generated by dividends. Considering that dividends contributed 42% of the total return of the S&P since 1930, I felt that they were necessary to include in this analysis. We will be looking at the returns of the past 95 years, which includes partial 2020 through July 29th. Out of the last 95 years, 70 years had a positive return and 25 years had a negative return. That means 73.68% of the time, the index provided gains. Here are all the returns. And here are those same returns sorted from best to worst. The annualized return over the last 95 years was 10.11%. For those that aren't familiar with the term annualized return, it's the geometric average return over a given period of time. It shows what an investor would earn over a period of time if the annual returns were compounded. Let's start our deep dive with unique 5-year periods. There were 91 unique consecutive 5-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 5-year annualized return was 28.56%, and that was the period from 1995 to 1999. The worst 5-year annualized return was negative 12.47%, and that was the period from 1928 to 1932. The average annualized return of all the 5-year periods was 10.18%. Out of the 91 unique consecutive 5-year periods, 79 yielded positive returns, and 12 yielded negative returns. That means if you invested in the S&P for a 5-year consecutive period, during the last 95 years, there was a 13.19% chance that you would lose money. Not the best odds, but also not too terrible. Here's a scatter plot of all the 91 unique consecutive 5-year periods. Let's move on to the 10-year periods. There were 86 unique consecutive 10-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 10-year annualized return was 20.06%, and that was the period from 1949 to 1958. The worst 10-year annualized return was negative 1.38%, and that was the period from 1999 to 2008. The average annualized return of all the 10-year periods was 10.42%. Out of the 86 unique consecutive 10-year periods, 82 yielded positive returns and 4 yielded negative returns. That means 4.65% of the time, you would have lost money. Comparing the 5 and 10-year periods, we can see that the average return increased slightly from 10.18% to 10.42%. Additionally, the worst possible return you could have achieved dropped significantly from negative 12.47% to negative 1.38%. And the likelihood that your overall return would be negative decreased from 13.9% to 4.65%. Here is a scatter plot of the 10-year annualized returns. Let's move on to the 15-year periods. There were 81 unique consecutive 15-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 15-year annualized return was 18.93%, and that was the period from 1985 to 1999. The worst 15-year annualized return was 0.64%, and that was the period from 1929 to 1943. The average annualized return of all the 5-year periods was 10.52%. Out of the 81 unique consecutive 15-year periods, all 81 yielded positive returns. That means if you invested in the S&P for any consecutive 15-year period during the last 95 years, there was a 0% chance that you would lose money. In fact, you would gain money every time. Keep in mind that past performance isn't indicative of future performance, but 95 years is a long track record. Simply by extending your time in the market from 5 to 15 years during the past 95 years, you would have eliminated the possibility of losing money. Here is a scatter plot of all the 15-year periods. Let's look even further. There were 76 unique consecutive 20-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 20-year annualized return was 17.88%, and that was the period from 1980 to 1999. The worst 20-year annualized return was 3.11%, and that was the period from 1929 to 1948. The average annualized return of all the 20-year periods was 10.82%. Out of the 76 unique consecutive 20-year periods, all 76 yielded positive returns. Additionally, we can see that going from 15 to 20 years also decreases the worst possible return we could have achieved from 0.64 to 3.11%. Here is a scatter plot of all the 20-year returns. Let's look even further. There were 71 unique consecutive 25-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 25-year annualized rate of return was 17.25%, and that was the period from 1975 to 1999. The worst 25-year annualized return was 5.9%, and that was the period from 1929 to 1953. The average annualized return of all the 25-year periods was 11.12%. Out of the 71 unique consecutive 25-year periods, all 71 yielded positive returns. We can see that going from 20 to 25 years also decreases the worst possible return we could have achieved from 3.11 to 5.9%. I don't know if you have noticed, but as the worst possible return gets better with longer time periods, the best possible return decreases as well. This is due to our reversion to the mean. The further we go out with our time period, the closer our best and worst return will be to the average return that hovers around 10 to 11%. Here is a scatter plot of all the 25-year periods. Let's go even further. There were 66 unique consecutive 30-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 30-year annualized return was 13.74%, and that was the period from 1975 to 2004. The worst 30-year annualized return was 8.47%, and that was the period from 1929 to 1958. The average annualized return of the 30-year periods was 11.16%. Again, all of the unique consecutive 30-year periods yielded positive returns. Going from a 25-year to a 30-year time period also decreases the worst possible return we could have achieved from 5.9% to 8.47%. I think a lot of investors would take a guaranteed 8.47% annualized return in a heartbeat. That would roughly multiply your initial investment 11 times over the 30 years. Here is a scatter plot of all the 30-year returns. Let's jump ahead by 10 years now to 40-year consecutive periods. There were 56 unique consecutive 40-year periods in the last 95 years. The best 40-year annualized return was 12.49%, and that was the period from 1950 to 1989. The worst 40-year annualized return was 8.85%, and that was the period from 1930 to 1969. The average annualized return of all the 40-year periods was 10.94%. All 56 unique consecutive 40-year periods yielded positive returns. So not much changed between the best and the worst 30 and 40-year periods. They appear to converge closer to the mean. The big difference here is the lowest possible return of 8.85% over 40 years would multiply your initial investment about 30 times. That's almost 3 times as much as being invested for 30 years at a slightly lower return. Pretty nice increase for just hanging in there for 10 more years. Here's a scatter plot of all the 40-year returns. Here are all the scatter plots shown one after another so you can better see how the trend shifts with longer time periods. And here is a comparison of the 5 and 30-year periods moving over time from right to left. As you can see, the 5-year periods are pretty unstable and there's a lot of volatility, and the 30-year periods offer you a lot of stability. Let's switch gears here for a second and say that you wanted to achieve a return greater than 8%. Let's see what our odds were for each time period. Out of all the 5-year periods, 32.97% of the time you'd finish below 8%. The 10 and 15-year periods are about the same, and the 20-year period is slightly better. When you move out to a 25-year period, your odds of not getting an 8% return drop to 5.63%, and at 30 years and beyond, they are non-existent. So as you can see, with a longer time period, your odds of getting a better return increase. Let's move away from the S&P total return for a minute. Let's assume that you invested $10,000 for a period of time and achieved an 8, 9, or 10% annualized rate of return over that period of time. How much do you think your initial investment would multiply? Take a look at the 8% return multiples first. You can see that they start off slow, but pick up pace as the time period increases. After 5 years, your initial investment would multiply 1.5 times. After 10 years, your initial investment would slightly more than double. After 15 years, it would triple, and so forth. Going out to 30 years would multiply your initial investment 10 times, and going a further 10 years to a 40-year period would multiply your initial investment by 22 times. The 9% return multiples start off pretty similar, but grow quicker as you move the time period further out. And the 10% return multiples follow the same pattern. Here you can see how much a difference a 2% higher return can multiply your initial investment over a longer period of time. The 40-year multiple more than doubled from the 8% return to the 10% return. The key takeaway from this example is that a longer time period results in a higher return multiple, and that multiple grows quicker the further out you go. So you want to get high returns over long periods of time to really grow your money. And as I already showed you, longer time periods tend to increase your overall rate of return. Since the S&P historically has more positive than negative years, a longer time period has a higher probability of catching more positive return years. Most people don't have a big chunk of money to invest at one time. It's much easier to contribute a reasonable amount of money each month. Let's say you had $100 to invest each month, and you would have invested that $100 in a fund that tracked the S&P 500 total return. Side note here, I'm using annual returns to compute gains. So my calculation assumes that you invest the full $1,200 on January 1st of each year instead of each month. The results for both methods should be fairly similar, especially over long periods of time. Additional side note, the calculations are done through year-end 2019 to include only full year returns. If you started investing $1,200 per year in 2015, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be worth $9,069.13, and you would have contributed $6,000 yourself. That means your portfolio gained $3,069.13 over that 5-year period. That's a 51.15% cumulative return and an 8.61 compounded annual growth rate. For anyone that doesn't know, a compounded annual growth rate is the mean annual growth rate of an investment over a specific period of time. It's one of the most accurate methods to compute returns of investment portfolios. Let's see what 10 years would get you. If you started investing $1,200 per year in 2010, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $26,223.52, and you would have contributed $12,000 of that yourself. That results in a gain of $14,223.52, and a cumulative return of 118.53%, and a compounded rate of return of 8.13%. Let's see what 15 years would get you. If you started investing $1,200 per year in 2005, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $47,176.40, and you would have contributed $18,000 of that yourself. That results in a gain of $29,176.40, and a cumulative return of 162.09%, and a compounded annual growth rate of 6.63%. Note that the compounded annual growth rate dropped significantly from the 10-year compounded annual growth rate of 8.13%. However, our cumulative rate of return keeps climbing because time is your best friend and rewards you for being patient. Let's see what 20 years would have gotten you. If you started investing $1,200 per year in 2000, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $71,280.22, and you would have contributed $24,000 of that yourself. That results in a gain of $47,280.22, and a cumulative return of 197%, and a compounded annual growth rate of 5.59%. The same pattern continues. Our compounded annual growth rate drops, but the cumulative return goes up. Starting to invest in the year 2000 was one of the worst times in recent history, with the dot-com bubble starting to pop, and then catching the 2008 financial meltdown just as your portfolio was starting to see some positive gains. But as you can see, if you use the buy and hold approach, in the end you'll come out ahead over a long enough period of time. Let's move out to a 30-year period now. If you started investing $1,200 per year in 1990, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $201,271.46, and you would have contributed $36,000 of that yourself. That results in a gain of $165,271.46, and a cumulative return of 459.09%, and a compounded annual growth rate of 5.9%. And going out 40 years, which is a typical time period for someone starting to invest in their early 20s and sticking with it till retirement, if you started investing $1,200 per year in 1980, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $775,943.38, and you would have contributed $48,000 of that yourself. That results in a gain of $727,943.38, and a cumulative return of 1,516.55%, and a compounded annual growth rate of 7.2%. That is a substantial amount of money to earn with very little effort other than consistently contributing over a long period of time. I have one additional trick to show you. As you get older, you tend to earn more money each year, be it through cost of living increases or getting a promotion or changing jobs. If you apply that same principle to the amount you invest, it can have exponential results. Let's look again at the 40-year period, but this time assume that each year you found an additional $10 to invest per month compared to the prior year. So in year 1 you would invest $1,200, in year 2 you would invest $1,320, In year 3, you would invest $1,440, and so forth, until year 40, when the annual contribution would be $5,880. That's a pretty gradual increase, and we can all figure out how to save an additional $10 per month. So, if you started investing $1,200 per year in 1980, and followed the increased contribution method we just talked about, at the end of 2019, your portfolio would be valued at $1,337,626.79, and you would have contributed $141,600 yourself. That results in a gain of $1,196,026.79, and a cumulative return of 844.65%, and a compounded annual growth rate of 5.77%. Wow, our portfolio's value is almost double the size if we kept our contribution fixed at $1,200 per year. You can probably see the cumulative return and compounded annual growth rate is significantly lower, and rightfully so. Since the contributions increased each year, more money was invested later into the portfolio and hence had a shorter amount of time to compound. I hope you can see how powerful time in the market is now and use it to your advantage going forward. If you're hesitant to invest because you're scared of losing your money, consider a long-term approach. Keep in mind that different time periods had different returns, and since we have no control over which time period we live in, there isn't much we can do, but ensure that our investing time period is as long as possible. Because even below average returns over a long enough time period end in impressive results. So if you're interested in adding an S&P fund into your portfolio, the main thing you want to look for is a low expense ratio. Here are a few recommendations where you can start your search. The Vanguard 500 Index, ticker symbol VFIAX, has an expense ratio of 0.04%. Vanguard is one of the largest and more popular brokerages. They are known for their simple approach and low fees. Another option is the Spider S&P 500, ticker symbol SPY. It has an expense ratio of 0.945%. SPY isn't an index fund, but it's an exchange-traded fund. The main difference here is that it trades throughout the day on the open market. It is one of the largest ETFs with over $250 billion in assets under management. A third option you can look at is the iShares Core S&P 500, ticker symbol IVV, which also has an expense ratio of 0.04%. IVV is also an ETF, but it has less assets under management compared to SPY, but a lower expense ratio. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe and like for more. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below.